Hi, I'm Rick Dior, and that was solo number 2 from the Rick Latham book, Advanced Funk Studies. Now, I had the pleasure of talking to Rick yesterday for a little while. He's out in California now. And we were talking about this book, and he reminded me that it was actually 40 years old this year, which I had no idea. And he wanted to tell you all that he is not old, although the book might be. So anyway, we talked, and I asked him that question that I posed in the first video. Was each one of these solos dedicated or styled after a certain player? And he said yes, they were, but he didn't have the book with him when I talked to him. And so he couldn't remember exactly, but he gave me kind of a rough idea. So the first one, like I said, was Gad. This one is David Garibaldi, which I thought as well, and so on. So each time I do one of these, I will give my opinion, not necessarily his, but he did tell me a few of them, and this is the one that he said was influenced by David Garibaldi. So I took out my David Garibaldi snare drum that I have. It's pretty old. It's a Yamaha drum. Not sure they make these anymore, but I really like the drum. It's tuned up pretty high. It's got that tight tower power kind of sound. I think it's a 3.5-inch drum, and it's brass and it's blue. So it's a pretty drum. It's different than anything I've ever seen. So I do use this on occasion for sessions where I need a really tight, almost kind of older sounding snare drum sound. And it works great for this solo. So this solo is based on that kind of R&B soul music 16th note groove, which is this. So a fancier version might sound like this. Now, like I said in the first video, one thing I do with all of these is that I play different versions of them. So that was the version pretty much as written, except for a few cymbal crashes here and there. Now I'll play you a version of it when I'm adding libs. So in other words, I'm adding some hi-hat rolls, some opens. This is a good tempo to use some of your rudimental stuff on hi-hat. That kind of stuff, short 5-stroke rolls, doubles, things like that, just to spice it up a bit. So now I'll play a version of it using that kind of technique. Same tempo. So there I did a few different things. I kept pretty true to the actual groove and what was written, but I'm adding some fills where I'm duplicating the snare drum with what the toms are playing. I'm adding some rolls, some opens. At the end, I choked a cymbal. So that's the kind of thing you want to experiment with when you're doing this. Now, let's look at line 1, 2, 3, 4. Line 4 has the famous shaft tip kind of thing on the hi-hat. So I've spoken about this in several of my videos, but what you want to do is the shaft of the stick first on the hi-hat, and then the tip. So it looks like this. Now there's not a lot of shoulder movement there. It's mostly kind of a limp wrist. And inevitably what happens is the downbeats get a little more accented than the upbeats. So now you can do it like this, but to me that's a little bit sterile, that just, you know, tickiness. So I prefer this. Now you'll notice that when you have those open hi-hats, you do not need to play the hi-hat again with the hand. So slowly I'll show you the first bar of line 4. So you see there, the hi-hat comes down in between there on the 3rd 16th note, so you don't need to duplicate that hi-hat again. And actually I think it sounds better like that because you get a really nice clean choke. So that whole kind of sound where you're not doubling after the hi-hat opens is super effective, and it's a lot cleaner. So I would recommend that you try that with this solo. Now, there's one more thing I want to talk about before we call it a day here. And the way I practice this kind of stuff is a little bit complicated. I use my book, of course, to do it. And on page 123, there's a whole page of broken 16th notes that I like to do. So what I do is I will get the 16ths going on the hi-hat like this. And then I'll play those rhythms and I'll break them up between the hi-hat, the snare drum, and the bass drum. But the gist of the snare drum and the bass drum is always there. So I'll give you an example of that at the same tempo, 100. So that's the first 2 lines of that. And it's pretty intricate, but what you want to do is move between the hi-hat and the snare drum and just create a solid groove, but not necessarily playing 2 and 4 on the snare drum. So you're kind of mixing it up. In a way, it's very linear. So you're not, you know, playing under exact 16th notes all the time. So, and then you improvise with that. Okay, so that's kind of the feeling you want to get. And just play with the click and play with some music. That's the best thing to do. And just improvise. But first you have to learn those techniques. So these kinds of pages with rhythms, you know, bass drum, snare drum rhythms, are perfect for that. So I hope you enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time with solo number 3. Thanks.